Yo, this might be a little bit of a different video, maybe a little controversial, but I had to ask you, what are the two strongest forms of dealing damage inside of this game that we all play? I guarantee you, at least for most people watching this, that the first thing that's going to come to your mind are rockets and Banner of War. In this video, we're just going to kind of talk about both of them and try to answer the question of which one of the two is better. Although, for being real, it's situational, right? So we'll start off with rockets. The reason why we're going to start off first with rockets are, first of all, they've been in the game longer and have really saw the surge in the meta ever since Gjallarhorn got introduced at the end of 2021 with the 30th anniversary pack. Obviously, this is very important because this allows you to have Wolfpack rounds on your legendary rocket launchers, and legendary rocket launchers, especially adaptive and aggressive frame ones, do a lot more base damage than the G-Horn. Especially now at this point, since Gjallarhorn has had its damage nerfed twice since it's been introduced into the game, meaning it really is to play support and give the legendary rockets the Wolfpack rounds for them to do the real juicy damage. Gjallarhorn's not going to be putting out that much damage in itself. However, this season we got added two new really darn good rocket launchers, even though we've already had two S-tier rocket launchers that were both introduced in season 21. That being, of course, the reprised version of the Apex Predator. Look at that absolute juicer perk pool. I don't know about you guys, but me personally, the Apex Predator is so good that I have 3 crafted versions of the Apex Predator: Reconstruction Bait and Switch, Reconstruction Bipod, Reconstruction Surrounded, and of course all of them with impact casing, you already know. You then have the Cold Comfort from the Ghost of the Deep Dungeon that can roll Envious Assassin and Bait and Switch, along with having something like Restoration Ritual to basically allow you to fire at least 4, sometimes even 5 rockets in a row before having to reload. Then this season, we got introduced the replacement for the Hothead, that being the Crux Termination 4. Unfortunately, this is a world drop rocket launcher, meaning RNG is going to be your worst enemy when trying to get yourself a good roll for this new arc aggressive frame rocket launcher. Looking at its perk pool, you can see that it does have things like Clown Cartridge in the 3rd column, as well as stuff like Slide Shot. This is the only slide shot rocket launcher in the game, and let me tell you, slide shot on a rocket launcher is exactly how you think it is. Absolutely insane, really fun, and can really juice out some good damage, especially if you have Surrounded in the 4th column and it is procced, although that is very situational. The other rocket launcher that we got added this season and we're talking about is actually the Dragon's Breath. This thing is very good damage, especially if you are using it correctly. You mostly want to use this in situations where you're not having to focus too much on burst damage, but for damage phases that have either multiple sections in which they take place. For example, Explicicator, Caretaker, and Locust in the Warlord's Ruin Dungeon are just a few bosses to name an example in which Dragon's Breath can be pretty darn good. The ability to reload itself after it has ignited the boss twice is very handy, meaning you can make some really fun rotations by using the Dragon's Breath. And if you are by yourself, this is a great weapon, just saying. Also, it's a season pass exotic, so there you go. And in Lightfall, whenever linears got their nerf, that just allowed the rocket launchers to completely take over the damage meta, as linears were their only true competition, but now there was nothing holding them back. And the rocket launchers would go unchallenged whatsoever for 6 months up until the release of Season of the Witch. Because in Season 22, Bungie went ahead and added the final strand aspects for all 3 subclasses, or all 3 characters rather, and this is where the Titan gained access to Banner of War and really began to rise in prominence with how strong it was. On a surface level, you could already see just how good it could be and the raw potential of it, as it was very easy to just get a Banner of War up with either a melee defeat, sword defeat, or a finisher on an enemy would proc your Banner of War. And then as you or your allies just defeat other enemies around you with anything, you can get up to a ×4, which does not affect the melee actual damage bonus, but it instead affects how often the heal pulse from your banner procs, which with ×4 is very often. So you have a very strong way of survivability with the heal pulse and woven mail, and then the actual melee bonus that you get from Banner of War is 40%, and your swords get a 10% bonus. However, when you couple that, this is just another way to get more melee damage on a subclass that at default at base with no exotic no aspect, nothing like that. It always has 3 melee charges. Especially at that time, you would just rock Synthoceps, 200% melee damage bonus, on top of a 50% bonus to your super damage. It was a no-brainer to go ahead and just add in a 1-2 punch shotgun to go ahead and juice your melee damage even further. And at first, the basic Banner of War combo would literally just be shotgun, melee, melee, shotgun, melee. Go ahead and add in a grapple melee for a 4th melee. Use your super, which did pretty decent damage as well, especially if you had biotic enhancements proc while you were using it. And then when you would come out of your super, you would have all of your abilities fully recharged and ready to go. You could do another 3 charged melees, all buff with 1-2 punch, and then your grapple melee for what was by far and away some of the easiest insane damage you could do, and one face just about any boss in the game. However, not even that was the actual true potential that Banner of War fully possessed, because that got fully shown on display when people started using the Navigator, which is the exotic trace rifle from the Ghost of the Deep dungeon, as that catalyst for the Navigator allowed you to spawn a free grapple point, and this took Banner of War to the next level, as you were basically able to get infinite grapple melees so long as you just kept refreshing your grapple point and you didn't whiff and miss it. This was some of the most insane damage, as with a 1-2 punch shotgun, you actually had enough time to shoot, grapple, then melee the boss and still have 1-2 punch proc. And since you're not locked behind having a number of melee charges, you can just keep going over and over again so long as you don't whiff your grapple point, which is the little skill gap that you really need to go ahead and overcome to truly unleash the potential of Banner of War. And then it gets even crazier, because in season 23, aka the season we are currently in, Bungie went ahead and changed how Worm Gods work. Worm Gods went from being dead in the water after they nerfed the Shield Bash build to being absolutely insanely viable on Banner of War, because now instead of getting up to it ×5 and then after 5 seconds you would just lose all of your stacks, you're now able to get at max stacks, which is still 5, a 275% melee damage increase, which is higher than Synthos. However, you don't buff your super at all, but if you're just using a grapple melee over and over again, this is obviously the one you want to go with, as this is just a much higher damage increase. So you can get up to 5 stacks, and then you just have a little bar that slowly decays through all of your stacks, meaning it's very easy to maintain them and still have a decent damage buff, even if it's not the max ×5, as the decay meter gets much slower at ×1 and ×2 Burning Fist, meaning you have just a lot of leeway to really have your Worm Gods carry their damage buff throughout the entire damage phase, and are overall some of the most insane melee damage you're able to put out these days. Of course, it's on a Worm God Titan, as if the Solar Mini Hammer and Shield Bash weren't crazy enough. The Worm Gods are back for a 3rd time to terrorize every boss in the game. So where does that leave us? Which one of these is better than the other? First things first, if I want to be brutally honest, your Banner of War grapple melees, they're going to do at max and in their best situation close to double what your rocket is going to do with Wolfpack rounds. However, Banner of War is a little bit more difficult to execute properly than just rocket dumping, right? And if you want to get the full-fledged force out of your rockets, you do gotta, have a Gallahorn at least somewhere in your fire team if you want the best version of your rocket. Whereas with Banner of War, you can do basically everything yourself, although if you want to do it properly and its max potential, you are going to need a Navigator grapple point. You're obviously going to want to have a debuff as well, and you can't run Tractor and Navigator at the same time. If you're really about that life, you can Nav point, then Tractor Cannon swap over and just never lose your grapple point. Although if you miss it, I mean, that's rip sauce right there, homie. However, it is able to be done by yourself. Although if you have anybody else in your fire team, they're going to want to debuff as well. And if you're not going to do Banner of War to its max potential, and now I'm going to worry about the Navigator point, then you can go ahead and run Tractor yourself, big dog. I would say to execute properly, Banner of War is going to be more rewarding with damage and maybe even just feeling good, because, hey man, it is satisfying hitting all your grapple melees and not messing them up at all. Although, to be fair, you do have to have Lightfall, whereas with having rockets, you just got to have a good rocket. Even the Hothead will still be really good these days. Although the best rockets that we have are the Apex Predator, Cold Comfort, and the Crux Termination 4. These things can absolutely juice out some massive damage in a very, very short window. Especially the Crux if you have something like Explosive Light, or even better, if you have a situation where you can proc Surrounded. You just get such a huge damage buff with Surrounded being procced on your rockets, and it's going to buff your Wolfpack rounds as well. There was a reason why they completely disabled Banner of War for the Crota Day 1 raid race, because it was just that insanely strong. And now it's just even stronger with the Worm God changes and the fact that people have really now seen just the potential that you can unleash with a Navigator grapple point. So truth be told, I can't even say definitively which one is quote unquote better, right? If you are a better player, you're probably gonna wanna opt in for Banner of War if you can execute it properly. However, rockets can one face any boss in the game when done properly. Although Banner of War is a lot more ammo friendly, at least to your heavy, because you're not jumping all of it in one damage phase. So it really kind of leaves us in a pickle on which one is better. If you're just getting into the game, you can do the basic Banner of War combo and put up some really good damage, or you can just rocket dump, which is very easy to do. And if you're a more experienced player, you're probably going to opt in for the max potential of Banner of War with the Navigator grapple point and Worm Gods. And then if you are a high skilled player who likes to use rockets, you're probably using rockets with RDMs or a really nice damage rotation. So with that being said, I'm going to wrap up this video with this sentence. Banner of War has a higher ceiling, but a much lower floor than rockets, where rockets have a much higher floor, but a much lower ceiling than Banner of War. Thank you for watching the video. Remember, if you want to get your games and DLC for a cheaper price, head over to Instant Gaming, top link in the description. They have quite the amount of PSN cards in stock. As long as you are in the US, you can get quite the amount of PSN cards for a really good price at the current moment, but you can always get your games and DLC for a cheaper price over at Instant Gaming, top link in the description. Y'all be safe, take care, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. Adios!